We get some weird calls in ambulance control. I've been working as a 999 call handler for a little over a year now. It's a decent job, not as well paid as you'd think, and the shift hours are a bitch, but I'm a university dropout who took what I could get. When someone calls 999 and asks for an ambulance, I'm one of the people they might end up speaking to. People always say, "I wish I had your job, it must be so exciting." Most of the time, it's really busy with people complaining that their ambulance hasn't arrived yet, like it's pizza. Sometimes we get the rough calls. People who are choking or in cardiac arrest. I've talked to countless people through CPR on their parents, grandparents, friends, sometimes even their kids, which always leaves a sour taste in the mouth. You don't get too long to dwell on it, though. Hang up once the paramedics take over, write your notes, go green again. That means you're ready to take another call. Sometimes it's good. You get grateful parents when you've helped them stop their kid's head from bleeding, or a lovely old lady whose husband is having a heart attack and you reassure her that help is on the way. I've delivered 3 babies over the phone since starting. Those are my standout moments. They make the crappy pay and the shitty calls worthwhile. We get weird calls too. I don't mean people who are crazy, although we do get our fair share of them. Usually they're pretty tame. They'll call you every name under the sun and then hang up. We aren't like the police. We can't just hang up on a caller if they abuse us. If they hang up, we have to call them again until we've finished the call. When you've got someone who answers every question with "go fuck yourself," you're in for an evening of fun and games. I took my first really weird call when I was being mentored. We'd done our classroom training, passed our exams, and we were out on the floor doing night shifts. My mentor was James, a call handler who had been there for 18 months when I joined. I was pretty pissed off on this night. Everyone else who had started training with me had graduated from mentoring. I was getting consistent praise for my calls. I followed the protocols to the letter, so what was I doing wrong? I heard the bleep in my ear and asked for the address. "This is a test call." Before I could say anything, before the voice had even finished the sentence, James practically launched himself over my shoulder and hit the mute button on the phone, so anything I said wouldn't be picked up on. I looked at him like, "What the ever-loving fuck are you doing?" And he just shook his head. 5 seconds passed, and then the cool female voice came through again. "Test call failed." The line closed down and James put my screen into training mode so that no new calls would come through. He stood up and gestured for me to do the same. "Another one, Anna," he called over to the control manager, who frowned and turned to the whiteboard. She added a tally mark under the heading "Test Calls, April." It was the 6th mark. We were only halfway through the month at this point. Then he nodded his head in the direction of the door, and I followed him into the training room. "Your training is done," he said. His voice was dull. Not like he was annoyed, more resigned. I was thrown. Had I done something wrong? I thought graduating from mentoring was a good thing, but James looked like I'd killed his cat. "Holly, we don't answer the test calls. We never answer them. Say nothing. When they come through, put yourself on mute." I asked for the address," I said, my whole body tensing with panic. "It's okay," he reassured me. "There are 5 seconds between them saying, 'This is a test call,' and 'Test call failed.' As long as you don't speak in that time, you're safe." This is where I started to think it was a big joke. This was my initiation, wasn't it? I'd passed my mentoring, so now they do their version of a hazing, convince the newbie there's some creepy conspiracy on the 999 lines. I laughed, but James's expression was deadly serious. "I'm not kidding," he said firmly. "Look, we've had people go missing before. They reply to the test call, they ask for the address again, or tell them to cut it out, and then they don't show up to work again. They don't answer messages or calls. We've sent police to their houses. They aren't there. They vanish. And it's always after they talk on a test call. We've tried listening to the recordings, but they're gone. It's like the call never existed." "Where does it come from?" I asked, wondering what the hell kind of job I'd just started. "What number do they call from?" They don't, James stressed, frustrated with me by this point. I can understand why now. None of us like to talk about the test calls. It makes us nervous. We've queried it with the police, the telecom companies, the government. There's no reason for it. No other service gets them. The other regional control centers don't even get them. It's just us, here. Why do you stay in this job then? I asked, mentally composing my month's notice at this point. Why would anyone want to continue working here? Look, on the grand scheme of things, the calls are rare, James shrugged. This is why I mentored you for so long. I needed to get you through the first test call. This control center is always going to need call handlers. And if we all left, who would warn the new ones? There would be people vanishing constantly. Maybe then they'd investigate whoever's making these calls properly, I suggested. James stared me out. How do you investigate someone that doesn't exist? He demanded. He had a point. The test calls eventually became a normal feature of the job, ranking on my list of irritations somewhere between the regular caller who wants to tell us about his penis all the time, and people who start their calls with, well, it's not an emergency, but... You hear the voice, you hit the mute button, you wait for it to be over, you let the control manager know. No one's vanished since I started. We've had new intakes and all of them have made it through their test calls. Some walked out of the job immediately, as soon as it was explained to them. Most stayed and accepted that as long as you're silent, you're safe. I thought the ones who left would run to the press, but no one ever does. I doubt anyone would believe them. They'd just write it off as a bitter ex-employee trying to smear the ambulance service. I've been here long enough that they're trusting me as a mentor. The next intake finished their training in a couple of days, and then they're out on the phones with us. It's a little nerve-wracking. I don't just mean the test call. Seeing any newbie take their first death, giving CPR instructions in a shaky little voice with their hand hovering over the compression counter at all times, is enough to get the blood pressure rising. I have more stories, but the test call is probably the weirdest. I mostly see it as a little niggle at the back of my mind. I'm always aware that the next call might be a test call, but I'm also aware that it might be a death, or a birth, or a broken leg, or a tummy ache. The satisfaction of a good call, and the comfort of a regular salary, outweighs having to be silent on the line for 5 seconds every few weeks or so. I'll try and update later in the week with a few of my more fun weird stories from my time on the phones, now that the unpleasant one is out of the way. I'll let you know how the newbie's first test call goes. Fingers crossed we can get it out of the way nice and early, or I'll be a nervous wreck for the next couple of weeks.